Hope everyone is doing well. We're always happy to see a good turnout. We know that this information on IEPs is important and quite popular. So we are glad to be able to be here. Thank you to the host. Thank you to Long Beach Forward, to Nubia and all her staff. We appreciate it and we're happy to be here. So my name is Sofia Cervantes, and I am with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We are a state advocacy agency, and so our agency is instituted by federal law. We are given the role to provide what we call technical assistance. All that means is feel free to give us a call to ask us your questions, and we can talk about any questions that you have related to anything disability. So if it's IEPs, if it's IPP for regional center, SSI, IHSS, etc., we can answer questions and or provide you referrals, right? So who else might be able to help you in the area that you have questions about? Our agency also provides training in the community. And so sometimes we get similar questions from individuals during our technical assistance calls. And so sometimes we say, let's make a training and let's provide it as a training, because a lot of people have questions about this. So this is kind of how this IEP presentation was formed and why it was formed. And so then we go and train in the different groups that request us to come and train. Our third sort of mission or thing that we do is work on systemic change. So we are mandated with advocating to change the laws, the policies for services and systems that serve you as parents of individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability, so that things could improve, that quality could improve, that equality could improve, etc. So that's pretty much our role. So today, what brings me here is to talk about IEPs. Before that, again, I'll just remind everyone, I want to be able to take questions. For the sake of the recording, it sounds like we will do the presentation sort of first. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them on the chat. Antonio, Cindy, Nubia, if you see a question without mentioning a name that is very related to the section that I'm going over, please feel free to open up your mic and say, oh, Sophie, can we ask a question here, and keeping it pretty general. At the end of the presentation, once we pause the recording and all of that, we'll be able to answer more specific questions. And again, you can contact us as well offline. I will put my information on the chat, doing it now, multitasking as I speak. Let's see how well I do at that. And then here is our phone number as well. And you can feel free to contact us offline for any questions that you have. Okay, I'd also like you to know that either Antonio and Cindy, if you would please put the Google link. We've created a Google link, so all the materials for today's presentation will be accessible to you under a Google Drive. Okay, so if you click on the link that is on your screen or on your chat right now, what you will see is something similar. And I'm going to share my screen right now to show you what you will be able to see when you click that. All right, everyone seen my Google Drive? Awesome. So if you go to the Google Drive through the link, you'll see an English folder and a Spanish one. Please feel free to choose your respective language. So I'll press English, and know that this training is the first out of a 3-part series, right? So we will be seeing each other, if you stick around, for the next 3 Thursdays, right? So today is IEP part 1. Next week will be IEP part 2, and the following will be diving in deeper into understanding evaluations for special education. So depending on the topic, if it's IEP part 1 or 2, you'll see other materials here. If you click on understanding evaluations, you'll see other materials here. This link, as long as you keep the link, you will have access to this from now on forever. Okay, so outside here in the presentation, you'll see part 1 and 2 with a star. Those are the 2 presentations that I'll be using throughout this series. So today we're going to do part 1 of this IEP presentation. And then the last session that we have, we'll use this 3rd one. for the second presentation. Okay, so again, you have access to the link and you can access the presentation as well as other related materials. And now everyone's seeing the presentation, the actual presentation. Awesome. Thank you very much. So on this first page, you'll be able to see my name, Sofia Cervantes, our contact number, and our website. So please do feel free to reach out. Okay. All right. Awesome. So feel free. I see some people using the thumbs up, and feel free to use all those emojis or reaction icons that you have available to you. All right. All right. So we are going to be discussing IEP meetings, how they work, and how to get what you need. All right. And give me just 1 second. Awesome. And I have the chat here available to try to track some of your questions here. Okay. All right. So we're going to be covering IEP meetings. I don't know about you, but many of the calls that we get is there's sort of this almost anxiety before going to an IEP meeting. And sometimes as you step out of the meeting, some people express some confusion at times. So we hope that this presentation will give you some clarity, one, of what even the IEP is, and then how to get ready for it, how to participate effectively in that meeting. So the first thing I'd like to focus on is this concept of, whenever there's issues with the school district, whenever there's disagreements with the school district, this first slide, or the first 2 slides that we cover right now, are pretty much presenting you the options that you have for any interaction that you have with the school. If there's a service that you need, if there is a disagreement that you have with the district, with the school district, if they have violated the law, depending on what is occurring with the school district, we're about to discuss some options for you to choose what way or what strategy, what thing should I be doing depending on what's happening in the background, what's happening with you and the school. So one of the first things that we discuss is the word schmoozing. Anyone familiar with the word schmoozing? Ish. Okay, I see someone raising their hand. So schmoozing is sort of being able to get things done, the way they say it, with a handshake and a wink, right? A wink and a handshake kind of thing. So the reason we put this is, if you are in a school district, let's say you have 3 children and your first 2 went to that same elementary school and you are buddies with the principal and everything's fine and dandy, and now your 3rd child is going and you're pretty good relationship with the district, and they offer you some services or some things because of that close relationship you have, and you have everything you need. Beautiful. Awesome. Go for it. Sometimes that's the way you can get things, right? You've kind of got this relationship with the school and it's like, well, on the low, let's give you 20 more minutes of speech, or on the low, let's do this. If you do that, if you have that relationship, go for it. What we do want to caution you is, know that anything that's not in writing within your IEP, whenever that contact that you have at that school leaves, then pretty much that agreement is gone. And there's really no way of going back and saying, oh, but Principal Teresa, whoever that is, Principal Teresa would give us this and this and this. That's going to be awesome if you're cool with keeping it informal and unofficial. But the second that something changes, know that legally you really don't have any right to anything that wasn't within or written into your IEP meeting. So yes, it is an option, but kind of be cautious with that caveat, right? If they leave, then that connection and those services might go along with them. So IEP meetings are the second thing. So keep in mind, IEP meetings, you really only want to request those or need those for one of 2 things. Whether you want to request a service or whether you want to request a change to a service. Those are, other than the fact that you have an IEP annually, Aside from that, the only two reasons that you really would be asking for an IEP is one, to request a new service, or two, to request a change to a current service. So a new service would be, again, let's say your son or daughter needs speech and language, right? They need some communication support and they don't have it. It's appropriate to request a meeting, an IEP meeting, and request that new service. On the other hand, it would also be appropriate to request it if you say, you know, my daughter has speech and language, but she only has 5 minutes a week. I think she needs more. If that's the case, it is appropriate to request an IEP meeting. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but do know that you have the right to request an IEP meeting as you see needed. They and the school district has 30 days to hold that meeting. By law, they should be holding that meeting 30 days within the date that you requested. We'll get into this a little further, but because of this, because there is a clock that legally starts running after you request it, we will always encourage you to do things in writing. Anything that's not in writing never happened and was never requested is what we could think of, right? So if you request an IEP meeting and you're like, man, 45 days have gone by, and then I often ask to people who call us in that situation, and I say, oh, did you do it in writing? And they say, well, no, I saw the principal in the hallway and I asked for a meeting. And so it's harder to demonstrate, hey, the district kind of went over those 30 days if you have nothing in writing proving when you submitted things, okay? So you have the right to request meetings. You want to be, we want to use our common sense, and we want to be able to consolidate meetings, right? IEP meetings are not really called every week, every month, but they are to be called or requested by you as the parent as needed, okay? And again, do it in writing, and the school has 30 days to hold that meeting. Now, again, IEP meetings are requested to request a new service or a change to a service. Now, what happens when you have the greatest IEP, right? It is a beautiful IEP. You have everything that you've requested. You want to hug it and kiss it because it's so good, right? It's such a great IEP. But let's say you say, well, he has speech and language for 20 minutes. He has a one-on-one. He has OT with the school, occupational therapy, but it's been 3 months that he hasn't received speech and language, right? Your IEP has the services listed. They should be providing it, but it's not happening. When this happens, many people revert to asking for an IEP meeting. And I want to point you to, if you have a great IEP that is not being implemented, then you don't really need an IEP meeting. Actually, let me rephrase that and say you don't need an IEP meeting. Because remember, an IEP is to get stuff into your IEP, but your IEP is already great. So the road to take when that happens is to file what's called a state compliance complaint. So it is a complaint to the California Department of Education saying, hey, my IEP is not being followed. The school is out of compliance, okay? So again, I like to make that difference here of, if that's happening, you have a wonderful IEP and it's not being implemented, you don't need to request an IEP. The next step is to do a state compliance complaint. Now, that state compliance complaint does go to the California Department of Education. However, you could and may want to make a copy of that complaint and give a copy to the school, right? And let them know, FYI, I have filed a complaint. And actually, if you all don't mind, I'm going to pause myself just to give a brief, not disclaimer, but just to describe something. I want to clarify and put out there, in case some of us don't know each other. We are the state council, me as a state council advocate, we are not for or against the school districts. Do know that because we're advocates, we do get calls from people who have struggles with the district, right? We understand that many people have wonderful relationships with the schools, and we want people to have great relationships. So sometimes my tone or my examples that I'm going to give obviously come from my sort of shadowed view as an advocate, because we get phone calls from all the people that have issues with the schools. We never right, get a phone call and say, hey, I just wanted to call you and tell you my school district is amazing, right? We never get those calls. So obviously the examples, the tone that may come out of me sometimes, we are not against the school. We are just giving you examples based on the phone calls that we get. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there. We encourage a collaborative approach with the school. We sometimes think, and we see our role as a bridge between parents and schools, because sometimes it's just families may not be using the right language, right, to communicate with the school. Or sometimes because the families don't know their rights, then they sort of have a conflicting relationship with the school district. Okay, so that said, when and if needed, the law gives you the right to do a state compliance complaint when something is not being followed. Okay, so now a few things here. A state compliance complaint, again, is when there is violations to there is non-compliance with things on your IEP. With this, I want to make a little note on the importance then of having documentation. How do you know that your son or daughter is getting their speech and language and all of their services? It's important for you to ask yourself, how do I know that they are getting it, so that you know that you have a way of knowing when and if they stop receiving their services, right? Some parents go by and they say, well, I just found out that it's been 4 months that they haven't had their occupational therapy. Right? And so you might want to ask yourself, in order for me to know if it's not happening, how am I going to ensure that I know that it is happening? If that made sense, right? So you might consider doing service logs. You might request a service log, right? Is that weekly? Is that monthly? Can you see the log that the therapist signed to confirm that indeed they saw your son for 20 minutes this week for speech and language, that indeed their one-on-one was present, right, et cetera, so that if and when it doesn't happen, then you can then do a state compliance complaint and have proof, right, and demonstrate, look, I've got service logs that demonstrate my son Richie hasn't gotten services for a month. Okay, even in making a state compliance complaint, let me say, you also always want to be reasonable, right? Always be collaborative. Let's say a day went by, right, and he didn't get a service, or maybe even a week, right, and he didn't get a service, your son didn't get a service. It's up to your discretion of what feels appropriate. When is it the right time for you to say, all right, I think we need to do a complaint, okay? And so earlier I was saying, although that complaint goes to the school, to the Department of Education, you may want to give a little copy to the school, right, and say, hey, I did a compliance complaint. Where that may help is, although state compliance complaints, they may take a while to be reviewed, maybe 60 days. The advantage of giving a copy to your school might be that if and when your school knows that you did a complaint, it may be in their best interest to fix whatever was happening, so that when the Department of Education does come to the school can say, oh, you mean this complaint by Ms. Gonzalez? Oh, guess what? It's been resolved. Bye, Department of Education. Don't come sneaking around here, right? We're good. We're done. So that can be an advantage to giving a copy and letting your school know, hey, I've done a complaint. Why? Because either you can do a state compliance complaint for when your rights have been violated, when they've broken the law, or when your IEP isn't being followed. So again, the example of if your son hasn't received the services that are listed on the IEP, that could be a reason for doing a state compliance complaint. If you submitted a request for an IEP and 45 days have passed and they haven't given you an IEP, that would be a reason for doing a state compliance complaint, because the law says they should do it within 30, or they must do it within 30. Okay, so third, you have the right to record your meeting as long as you give them 24-hour notice. Let's say you get to the meeting and say, oh, we got your notice, but no, miss, you can't record your meeting today. That would be a violation. That would be them breaking the law and violating your right. That also would be a reason to do a state compliance complaint. Okay, so again, IEP meetings, we usually have them, or you would usually have them, to request a new service or to request a change to a current service. However, if your IEP is not being implemented, then the option for you is a state compliance complaint. Okay, now, what happens when you have an IEP meeting and y'all just can't agree, right? You're saying my son needs 20 minutes of speech and language, and they say, no, he's good with 5, right? Or let's say you're saying my son needs to be in a moderate to severe classroom, all while the school district says, nope, they should be in a mild to moderate. Whatever the disagreement is, know that that disagreement can only be resolved with what's called a due process. And due process is a legal process where you, the school district and yourself, with representation from a lawyer, go to a hearing judge and they hear your case, right? So a due process does require a lawyer. Now, one thing to note about that, because that may be a little intimidating, even just financially, right? How am I going to get a lawyer, right? Do know that if you have a strong case, right? You've got documentation, you've got things in writing, it is possible that you may get a lawyer who may charge you a very low fee at the beginning, or maybe even not charge you at the beginning. That may happen. Why? Because if you win your case, then the school must reimburse you for the attorney fees. So because lawyers know that if they review your case and say, oh, we're going to win this, they may be very comfortable taking your case for free at the beginning because they know that you're going to be able to pay them when the school reimburses you. The reason why this is true is because the law, FAPE, if you've heard of FAPE, free, appropriate, public education, the fact that it says your son or daughter has the right to a free, appropriate public education, if you had to pay for a hearing in order for your son or daughter to get an adequate education, then it wouldn't have been free. So that is why they have to reimburse you if you win, okay? A little note of caution. Do know that they will only reimburse you for attorney fees, only lawyer fees. If you have an advocate, they are just an advocate, those would not be reimbursed, right? Now, if there's an advocate working under an attorney and they reimburse the attorney and then the attorney is going to pay the advocate, cool, right? But just make sure you have an attorney representing you. That would be the only person getting reimbursed. Know that for due process, you have 2 years to do a due process. Okay, so if you're thinking that you're going to, do a complaint or pardon me, if you think that you are not in agreement with something, but let's say right now you say, I don't have the energy for a due process right now to learn what that's about. I just can't. But then in a year from now, you say, you know what, I'm ready. This has not been resolved and I'm ready. You can go to a due process for issues in the past 2 years. Okay, so know that that's a option there, due process. Okay, and I believe we have some questions and we'll take them in just a bit, maybe after each section, and I will follow the organizer's lead as far as if we're opening mics or if they want to read the question to me based on the fact that we're recording. However you guys want to manage that, I'll defer to you in just a little bit. Okay, so either an IEP meeting, a state compliance complaint, going to due process, those are some of your options. Another option is if your issue with the school is related to discrimination, then once again, would the appropriate route be to ask for an IEP meeting? Probably not, right? The appropriate step might be to do a complaint to the Office of Civil Rights, an OCR complaint, Office of Civil Rights. And again, excuse me, this is in the matter of things that have to do with discrimination due to their disability. Okay, so you might ask yourself if you've been through this, but if your son was ever, let's say, excluded from a field trip because of his needs, and maybe they told you, you know, miss, we're not going to be able to take Johnny to the field trip because you know how he gets when he's excited and we can't help him, whatever that sounded like. If he was excluded due to a disability related need, that is discrimination, right? And so you are able to do an OCR complaint, an Office of Civil Rights complaint. Okay, so again, ways to solve disagreements with the school or ways to solve issues with the school. It depends on you saying what's the issue and then what is the appropriate route then. Do I indeed need an IEP meeting, or do I need to do a state compliance complaint, or do I need a lawyer to go to due process, or do I need to do an OCR complaint? I just want to point out here, know that in your Google Drive, in the materials that I've provided for you, if you look in the folder under IEP Part 1 and 2, I have placed a list of attorneys, of special education attorneys for you. They are there. I have also provided you with the state compliance complaint form so that you can look at it, right? And I would say the best time to look at that paperwork is when you're not needing to use it. If right now things are going great with the school, look at it now, right? Because when the crisis, you know, when the disagreement happens, that's when everything feels like crisis, right? And it's a little hard to, oh, this form, I can't even remember my name right now, right? How do I fill out this form? So right now, when things are smooth, maybe take some time to learn about what it would look like if you ever needed to do a complaint, right? If you ever wanted to go to a due process, sort of take that time. Not to assume that we all have all this free time that you're looking to fill, but all I'm saying is it's best to really look at when you're not going through it so that it's less stressful. Okay, if someone else is going to do it, maybe tag along and say, oh, can I look at your form? Can I see how you did it? It's the best time to learn. Okay, and now I'll defer to the organizers. Let me know if you guys want to open questions or anything like that.
Yes, it looks like we have a question from Raquel Morales. Raquel, you feel free to unmic and ask your question.
Yes, I had a question because about the disagreement when you have a disagreement with the class, with the principal and the counselor and everyone with the school, that's when you could come in the lawyer, right? That was my question about it. Like, if you're not sure about it, like, and you ask them, I think my son needs a 101, and they told me, oh no, he doesn't need it because he doesn't behave like a behavior, like a really strong behavior. But my point is not about the behavior. It's more about he's not focused at all. He's not in the moment when he needs to be in the moment of the class. Yeah, and I left it there and I said, okay, I'll take what it is right now, but if it doesn't work out, then I'm definitely gonna need in 1-on-1.
Yeah. And so to your question, Raquel, yes. Any disagreement with the school as far as services that you think they should provide and they say no, those disagreements would really only be solved within a due process. We are going to talk today, next week, and the following about how to prepare documents to maybe argue your case a little stronger during the IEP so that they do say yes. You know, how can we be more effective so that we can get what we need? But if at the end of all of that, it's a no, the answer is yes. The next step would be a due process. And unfortunately, I emphasize only a due process because we get calls and sometimes it breaks my heart, right? To hear the family, like the school won't do it. And I say, you know, unfortunately, the next step is a due process. The school can continue saying no forever. And unless you go to a due process, then perhaps something will happen. But unless we do a due process, things are kind of going to stay the way they are. Okay. Or unless, and knock on wood, we don't want it to get worse, but let's say your son has an incident, or let's say something happens, that's when it's unfortunate. And as an advocate, we would say it could be a blessing in disguise in terms of you have more evidence now of saying, what do you mean my son doesn't need a one-on-one, right? Because of the lack of, look at what's happening, right? We had an incident. He left school. The cops were called. He threw a desk, whatever happened, whatever the situation is. Okay. But yes, due process would be the way to go. And remember, you can go to a due process for any disagreements within the past 2 years. Okay. Any other?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you because I have asked for other from other support from my family. They also work for the district, but not from Long Beach, from other district from LAUSD. They have told me you can tell them that you have the right because you're the one who you're the boss of them, because they need to require whatever if your son needs help, they have to give it to you. Yeah. Unlike like you told me, the other step is called by a lawyer or something.
Yeah.
But it is hard.
I hear that. And Raquel, to speak more specifics and all of that, please feel free to, give us a call and we can get more into your case. If you would, though, you kind of bring up a point that thank you for saying that, because it reminded me to discuss this, that when we talk about state compliance complaints, due process and all that, or when you're told it's your right to get this, right? The law, even as you hear me tell you, the law says this, do keep in mind that the law is like the stop signs that you see on the street. The law is the, wow, I forgot my English. I can only think about it in Spanish. The semáforo, the light post, the traffic light, the what?
El tránsito.
Yeah, there you go. So, wow. So what I mean by that is the law is written, but just like the stop sign is there. But what happens, people violate that stop sign all the time. People cross the red light all the time. And unless a cop is there to catch them and the cop actually stops them, there's really no consequence, right? So the law, although it's there, there's really no consequence unless a parent advocates and uses the tools that the law gives them and says, hey, do a whistle. Hey, they're breaking the law over here. They're not following the IEP. They're not following the stop sign, right? So that's why these state compliance complaints, these due process, the due process, that's sort of what you have as tools to say, hey, they passed the red light. But unless you do this, then, and there's no state compliance complaints or nothing, to the Department of Education, it looks like, wow, this district is doing amazing. There's no tickets, right? No, they haven't gotten any tickets. They haven't gotten any complaints. So I say this to, again, encourage you to do it as needed. I'm not saying, yeah, go complain, right? No, just do it as needed, right? But again, if you are frustrated with whatever is happening with the school, unfortunately, it's unlikely that anything will happen unless you move forward with one of these things, right? A state compliance complaint, due process, an OCR complaint, etc. So I encourage you to use them as needed for that reason, because the law is like the stop signs, okay? Nubia, were there any other questions or things I should address before moving on?
No, I think that's it for this section. We can move on.
Thank you. So,
oh, wait. There, we do have a raised hand.
Yes.
Leila?
Yes, I have a quick question. How do we submit the IEP? Is it like in writing via email? Do I get a notary and take it to the school? How, or I just bring a piece of paper to school? How does anyone have proof of the date that I submitted it?
That you submitted the IEP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't submitted
So-
one yet, but if I want to, how do I show proof for
Good.
the
So
30
the
days?
IEP, good question, Layla. So the IEP is created as a team. You are a participant of that team, but the IEP is usually a document that is reviewed as a team during the IEP meeting. And then the school finalizes usually what was discussed, what the goals are. We're going to talk about all that, right? And then they give you a paper to sign. So the IEP is usually something that is constructed by the school, given the discussion that was had within that IEP meeting, of which you are a part of, right? And then they give you something to sign. We'll talk about that, because briefly, I just want to say you don't have to sign it that day, because you probably want to take it home and review it and make sure that everything you talked about is in there, but you must sign it within a reasonable amount of time. But that's usually the way it works. I want to make a point here. Do know that it is against the law for them to do an IEP meeting document and just say, oh, we already decided what's good for your son or daughter, just sign it. That is called predetermination, right? That is against the law. So they can bring a draft of an IEP, right? And say, oh, this is kind of what we're thinking, but you are a participant of that meeting and you are a participant of that IEP team, and you get to voice your opinion about what should go in the IEP, right? And that should get in there and all that, and then you sign. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, but you get to sign in agreement or in disagreement or in partial agreement or in partial disagreement. We'll get into all that right now, okay? But the school is the one who kind of presents you that document that was constructed as a team, and then you sign within a reasonable amount of time as you see appropriate.
Sophia, one of our participants is asking or throwing out a possible clarification, wondering if Layla is asking about when you are submitting an IEP assessment or requesting an IEP meeting. So what kind of proof, like?
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. Okay, wonderful. So, thank you. So Layla, when you are requesting an assessment, yes, you can write it in a document and say, I'm requesting an assessment or I'm requesting an IEP meeting. Make sure you put the date. It can be a letter, but what we do suggest is that you do it, you take a copy either in person and you get it stamped and signed that it was received, or you do it by registered or certified mail. Okay. Some people ask about doing it by email. We don't suggest the email. Reason being is an email doesn't give you proof that they received it unless they answer. So you want proof, you have proof that it was sent in your outbox, but if they don't say anything, you don't have proof that they received it. Okay. And we'll get into that in just a little bit, actually, right here in this next slide. We'll get into it when we talk about letters of understanding. Okay. In anything that you request in writing, we suggest that you do it on paper per se, right? On paper, that you write a note on it. I'll review that right now at the end. And that you have proof that they received it for everything and anything. Okay. So yes. Does that answer your question better? Awesome. So pretty much just delete the whole other section, Nubia. Okay. Just kidding. Thank you for clarifying that question. All right. So the other way, so we're coming back from this slide, right? So we talked about IEP meetings, complaints, due process, OCR, Office of Civil Rights complaints. Now, know that there's another way of trying to solve disagreements, but this is more coming from a different angle, okay? And let me just give it to you, although it won't be our focus today. And we call that public participation. If you notice that every school, right, has board meetings, has CAC meetings, that may be a way you attending those meetings, giving public comment. That's what we call public participation. That may be a way of you sort of speaking out about something that's wrong with the system so that things could go more smoothly for you too. But public participation is more of a systemic approach. And when we say systemic, it means it impacts more than one person, right? So these things in the first one are directly related just to your case. But when you do public participation, that means that you are getting involved at a higher level so that things improve, not just for your son, but for everyone else. And so we just want to put that option out there, that we do encourage you to get involved, right? To get involved in your CACs, to get involved in your board of directors meetings for your school, etc. Okay, so that's just a little side point. Now, letters of understanding are something that are helpful all throughout, regardless of what you do, right? Whether it's you're going to an IEP meeting, you're doing a complaint, right? Letters of understanding are we consider them so important. I'm not saying they're going to solve any problems, but I am saying letters of understanding sort of help you keep documentation of what's happening. Because again, if it's, right, who can complete the phrase? If it's not in writing, it never happened, right? If it's not in black and white, it never happened. And so we really encourage what we call letters of understanding. Letters of understanding is not something official, just so you know, we've kind of labeled it that. What a letter of understanding is you writing a letter summarizing what happened after anything happens that you think should be on paper. Let me explain. So let's say, I think Raquel, right, was talking about having a one-on-one. Let's say that you were called that your son had an incident. No one knows what happened, but he fell and he's bleeding from his left knee, and they call you and say, can you please come pick him up, right? And then you pick him up at the nurses. When you get there, you see not only he's bleeding from his knee, right, but his shirt looks like it was pulled, his elbow needs stitches, his eye is bleeding, his hair looks like it was cut, right? Maybe I'm exaggerating, right? But what I'm saying is you find a lot more than what was told to you. And then let's say you say, can I have an incident report? And the incident report only says he scraped his knee and was bleeding a little bit. Right? When you're like, when my son got there, he was losing a pint of blood, right? Kind of thing, right? Like the incident report was not accurate. We suggest using letters of understanding. Again, a letter of understanding would be, dear such and such, on this date, I was called at 11:10, being notified that my son had fallen at school and had scraped his knee. When I arrived at the school at 11:23, whatever, right? At 11:20, I found my son. He was crying. He indeed had a scrape on his knee. He also was missing half his shirt. He looked like he came back from the war, right? Whatever happened to your son, you can describe, you can add pictures if you want, right? If anything in this letter, and this phrase is in your PowerPoint, if anything in this letter is incorrect, please notify me or please inform me within a reasonable amount of time. We sign it. We take it to the school in person and get it signed that it was received, or we send it through registered mail. Registered mail sends you a little card with a signature of who received it, and you keep that letter. Let's say 2 weeks later, something similar happens. Miss, Johnny fell, you show up again and something's clearly wrong. You're like, is my son being bullied? What's happening, right? And then you're like, what do you mean no one saw? And he's supposed to have a one-on-one aid and they tell me no one saw it, right? You have all these questions. What do we suggest? Another letter of understanding. Okay, on such and such date, I was called again, etc. You get my drift, right? A week goes by and another incident happens. You do another letter of understanding. What we're saying is these letters of understanding can help you in the following ways. One, you now show up to your IEP and you say, I'd like to discuss that my son needs a one-on-one, right? And then the school says, well, no, Johnny's so great. He's perfect. Well, if everything's going great, why has there been 3 incidents? Right? I've sent you 3 separate letters, right? This starts accumulating proof, right? Because again, in any situation, especially in a due process in front of a judge, it's your word against theirs, Who is the judge? Whose side is he or she going to be on? The school, right? So unless you have things in writing, right, then, and I'm not even saying this is going to save you, but I'm saying, one, if you have things in writing, then you're more credible. You start looking more credible. This will also help your lawyer feel like he's got something, she's got something to grab on, right? Okay, you're telling me all this stuff has happened, but I don't know how to help you because we have no proof of anything, right? So a lawyer may not be able, would maybe not even take your case because of the lack of proof, right? So we're saying these letters of understanding can be helpful to accumulate evidence to help you tell your story. And we'll go into a little more reasons why this can be so helpful, okay? And again, a big thing to highlight here is make sure, one of the biggest things is write the letter, include this little phrase, if anything in this letter is incorrect, please inform me within a reasonable amount of time. The reason this can be powerful is you are saying, if anything in this letter is wrong, tell me within a reasonable amount of time. So if they never respond to you, their silence means they are in agreement with what you said in that letter, right? Because the phrase says, if anything's wrong in here, tell me. So when you're in front of the judge and she reads your letter, right? Then they be, oh, school, did this really happen? You told this to the parent? Wait, did you write them back? Did you? No. Okay. So they start losing a little credibility, right? You've got things in writing. The judge now has questions. That's good for you, right? For your case. And so letters of understanding, letters of understanding, letters of understanding. Okay. I see a comment here. School staff don't want to put things in paper. How can we request to have it documented? Great point. Thank you for bringing that up. You want to try to get it in paper, but the reality is sometimes you're not going to get it. So this strategy of using letters of understanding is your way of documenting what happened, including saying on such and such date, I requested such and such document. I was told that I could not have it, or I was told that I would be given a copy in 2 weeks. It has now been a month and I have not received anything. If anything in this letter is incorrect, please notify me within a reasonable amount of time, right? So you, in the law, there, other than you requesting student records, right? Officially student records, the law doesn't have anywhere where it's like the school must give you an incident report after an incident within 5 days. There's nothing like that in the law, which is why they don't technically have to do it. So sometimes they don't do it. Okay. And that's why we suggest this use of letters of understanding. Okay, so that they can help you prove your story, that they can help you document what happened. What if you go to a due process in 1 year and 8 months, right? How are you going to remember what happened today? Okay, so you want to keep that in mind. All right, we are going to take a brief break and we're going to give our translator also a little break. Thank you for keeping up with me. Sorry, hope I'm not speaking too fast, Annette, but we're going to take a, what are we saying, 5-minute break? Yes, 5-minute break. So we will be back at 7:05 and yeah, we'll see you in just a little bit. Feel free to grab some water, stretch, do a bio break.
¿No se escucha?
Estamos en un breve receso, señora Irma. Regresamos a las 7:05.
Gracias, como fui al baño.
Sí, no se preocupe. We are in a short break. We'll be back at 7:05. Estamos en un receso breve. Regresamos a las 7:05. All right, shall we continue? Awesome. I will share screen again. All right. Okay, everyone sees the presentation again? Yep. I think I see some thumbs up.
Sí,
Awesome.
gracias.
Gracias, Irma. Okay, so we were talking about the letters of understanding, right? So very important to have letters of understanding, can really help you tell the story, can really help you have proof for later on, right? About what will tell the story to the judge, okay? And we're gonna talk a little bit more about this. There was a question about how about if the student hasn't made progress in their education? Okay, so to this question, I will answer it right now, but know that throughout these next 2 weeks, the end of this presentation next week and the following, we'll be learning a lot more about how evaluations can help us advocate for what we need. And so this question will kind of be answered all throughout in a way too, okay? But if a student hasn't made progress in their education, that is exactly why special education exists, because it's supposed to provide services and supports to help a student have to benefit from their academic education. So if they're not performing well in academically, then it's demonstrating a need for more services and supports. So in your IEP, it'll be important to use evaluations that are available to you to demonstrate how the level that he's performing at demonstrates that he needs more support. And if, again, in the end, they were to still not be in agreement that indeed he needs more help, then that is where you may need to resort to a due process. Okay, but so this question will sort of answer it a little bit more throughout as we go through all the pieces of this presentation. Okay, all right. So letters of understanding, and again, having proof that they received it. So the reason why these letters of understanding are so important is for the following. There is Rights Law is a special education body, sort of agency that has something called laws of adverse assumptions. Okay, and what that means is not to be pessimistic, but in special education, you really want to assume that you're gonna go to a due process, that things are gonna go bad, right? So laws of adverse assumptions. I am assuming that the adverse day will come. I don't know if any of you remember when we had the Y2K scare. Anyone remember? That supposedly the world was gonna like shut down when it turned into the year 2000. You know, cashiers were gonna be disconnected, just nothing was gonna function, right? I remember in those times my mom, you know, rushed to get canned food and water, and our little closet was full of food, right? And one day I remember I came into the house and I opened the fridge and I'm like, Mom, we have nothing in the fridge, but our Y2K closet is full, right? So luckily, you know, the 2000 came, Happy New Year, and nothing happened, thankfully, right? Sorry, I had put an alarm to give ourselves a break. So nothing happened. But thankfully, if it had happened, my mom was ready with her full closet full of food, right? None of us were going to go hungry because my mother was prepared in that little closet, right? So with laws of adverse assumptions, it's kind of saying the same thing, right? The day that you're going to need to go to a due process will come, is what we're saying, and that it is better for you to plan it that way so that if that adverse situation with the district happens, you've got your closet full of evidence, you've got your closet full of things in writing, versus what if the bad day comes when there's disagreements and the relationship is adverse with the school district and you have nothing, right? So Rights Law says, you know, these laws of adverse assumptions assume that you're going to have to request a due process. Again, because if you assume that you're going to go to a due process, you're probably going to prepare better. You're probably going to do things in writing. You're probably going to do your complaints if need be, because you're thinking, I need this for when the bad day comes. Assume you will request that hearing, that you will be in front of the judge. Assume that all school staff will testify against you. And remember the opposite facts. I'm not saying they're going to lie. I'm not saying that school districts or school personnel are bad or anything. I'm just saying, assume that they may remember a completely different story than you. And so what will be your way of telling your story? You pulled out these magical letters of understanding, right? That you wrote a year ago, right? It is much more valid to show someone something in writing that was written back when the incident happened versus someone telling their story right now, recollecting, right, memories from a year ago. Kind of like when a car accident happens, right? They ask you questions, and unless you had it in writing, boy, you know, now you're like, the car was blue and it was yellow, kind of thing, you know? So assume that the staff will testify, will remember something complete opposite of you. Assume that the hearing officer, the hearing judge, will be biased against the families. Go in thinking that judge is not on my side. So how am I going to have enough evidence to demonstrate, yo, I'm telling you what happened. I've got all these letters versus a school who's not describing what actually happened, right? Assume that you cannot testify. Okay, assume that you will not have a chance to be in the stand, right? Anybody else into law shows? Sometimes all my dreams at night are about me like being in the courtroom because I watch so many other shows, but assume that you will not be able to be in the stand and testify. meaning your letters are the only only ones that can speak for you. Because if you can't testify, how am I going to tell my story? Your letters of understanding. And let me make a point here. The letters of understanding, if you communicate with the school through email and that goes well for you, we're not saying stop that, but we are saying you may want to get in the habit of every week or every month writing a letter summarizing what has happened in those emails. The reason for that is, one, most judges, I think we know about, or the percentage that we have is about half of the judges don't accept emails as evidence, right? And two, have you ever printed an email conversation? Ain't nobody got time for that, right? Like, it is a thick stack, and then it's set, you're like, who sent it? Wait, who? Oh no, that person was copied. It's too confusing, right? So instead of giving a stack to a judge and like, oh, look at what happened, she is not going to have time for that, right? So it is in your best interest to do a letter summarizing what's happened in those emails, right? And also, because if the judge that you get doesn't accept emails, then great, you have your summary letters of understanding, okay? So just the importance of those. Now, important things to know about this IEP process and laws related to that, okay? And let me just read a quick question here. What about if the student does well academically, but I am more worried about his disability affecting his social emotional development? Will we be going over that kind of need for an IEP? Very good question. I would say definitely let's connect more offline so we could really talk about the details. However, do know that there is an eligibility criteria to be eligible to get special education. If the category in the eligibility criteria would probably be under emotional disturbance. If the emotional disturbance is impeding his academic progress, then yes, he may be eligible to receive services and supports. But if he has an emotional disturbance, but he's performing well in school, then it's very likely that school will say, it's got nothing to do with us. He's doing good in school. Services are only for those that are having challenges that are impeding their academic achievement, right? So in that case, it may be more like Department of Mental Health. It may be more, right? But if the emotional disturbance is she is so depressed or anxious that they cannot focus in class, they cannot learn, then they may be eligible, right, for special education. This isn't just for emotional disturbance. This is even for autism, right? Let's say someone's diagnosed with autism, but they are amazing in all of their subjects. They may not be eligible for special education because they're performing well in academics, okay? So it's the eligibility criteria is not only to have the diagnosis, one of the 12 that are described in the eligibility criteria, but number two, that condition must be impeding their academic achievement. It's kind of a two criterias. They don't just need a diagnosis, they need to demonstrate that their condition is in the way of them achieving progress academically, okay? But let's talk some more offline if you'd like, okay? So now I'd like to review a few things, and I'd like to put these first. I kind of see it like if we were in an elevator ride and I needed to tell you like the most important things, like, oh, I hope you know this about the IEP. This is kind of what these next two slides are, okay? And then again, if you are here, we want to encourage you, please join me for the next 2 weeks, because this is quite a lot of information. And so we will be taking it, little by little. I don't even think I'll be able to finish this part one, by our time, 8 o'clock. And that's okay, because we have the next 2 weeks. So we'll kind of be, playing it by ear as we go. So one of the most, a few important things. One, we already mentioned you can request a meeting, an IEP meeting, do it in writing, have evidence that they received your request in writing. And in that request where you're saying, I'm requesting an IEP meeting, you can also already notify them that you will be recording your meeting. Okay, you have the right to record your meeting as long as you give them 24-hour notice. Again, we encourage you, we highly, strongly encourage you to do it in writing. If you just call them and say, hey, FYI, this is my notice that I'm going to record the meeting that we have next Monday. And then you show up to the meeting and say, well, you didn't tell us you were recording, you can't record. And you don't have evidence that indeed you did. That's when the school might tell you, nope, you can't record, right? The reason for that is if you're going to record, you better believe they're going to record too, right? So that's why you're required to give them 24-hour notice. So you don't have to wait 24 hours before. When you request the meeting, you can already also put there, this is my notice that I will be recording. Another thing for non-English speakers, right? So those on the Spanish channel, if you're going to need interpretation services during that meeting, you need interpretation, then also, be sure to request that in that same notice, right? I'm requesting a meeting, I'm going to be recording, and I'm requesting interpretation services. Okay. Now, know that we really encourage everyone to record their meetings. I do also want to say, does that sometimes seem to rub the school the wrong way? Yeah, a little bit, right? And that's for you to determine how you want to do that, right? But from our perspective, we highly encourage you to record. Why? So much is spoken in that meeting, right? You may not be able, you may take notes or take someone to take notes with you, for you, but it's hard to keep track of all that. Two, there are sometimes when we get phone calls and we say, that in that meeting, and again, I'm not against the school, it's just our calls we get, that in that meeting, they told me, ma'am, you need to just accept that your son is just never really going to learn, right? Your son doesn't really have potential, right? If that is said in a meeting, oh my gosh, I really hope you were recording, right? And I tell the people who call us, if you're recording, you know what? When they say that comment, maybe give them a hug. I'm just kidding. But get the microphone closer to them, right? Like, oh, is that right? Right? Get that so that later on it can help you, right? Versus we're getting amped up and yet we didn't turn it into evidence, right? So recording the meeting can help you, right? And let's say they say, you know what? I agree. Your son really does need help. And then they deny you. You could go, right? Rewind. That wasn't a good noise. Bad sound effects. But you rewind and you're like, didn't you even in the meeting say that you agreed that they needed it, right? I'm getting real good at my lawyer work. Just kidding. But because of those reasons and more, we're saying record, right? Record so that you can take notes after and remember what was said, so that if something inappropriate is said, you have evidence, and so that if something good is said, you also have that on record and documented. Okay.
We have the Audi Lopez.
Yes.
Her hand up.
Yes. Audi, please go ahead.
Hola, buenas noches. Sí, bueno, a mi niño lo diagnosticaron con ADD desde noviembre y yo llevé la carta ese día de saliendo de la pediatra. Yo me fui con mi niño a la escuela y entregué la carta. Y después me hicieron una meeting con algunos maestros y la counselor, y creo que estuvo la psicóloga ahí. So me dijeron que iban a hacer algunas cosas con mi niño. Mi niño está en Miroscu, está en séptimo grado. Y me dijeron que en 6 semanas me iban a dar respuesta para ver cómo había sido la evolución de mi hijo. Nunca recibí nada, nunca me llamaron, y yo estaba esperando si ellos me llamaban, ¿verdad? Si ellos me decían algo. So, me tocó la cita nuevamente con la pediatra, me preguntó qué había pasado en la escuela, no mejoró, mi hijo está muy mal en las calificaciones, mal en Fs. So, mandé un email mandé un email dirigido a la counselor y a la psicóloga con fecha, mi firma y especificando lo que quería que hicieran con ellos, porque la pediatra especificó que el niño necesitaba el plan 504, creo, durante la escuela. So, no hicieron nada, apenas el día 2, ayer tuve la meeting nuevamente con ellas después de ese email que yo mandé, y ya entonces ya firmé algunos papeles, ya me dijeron todo lo que iban a hacer con él. Le van a dar más tiempo para sus exámenes o quizzes, test que tengan. Y pues voy a ver qué está pasando, qué va a pasar después de esto. Porque me dieron hojas extras, unas copias de que yo podría seguir ese siguiente paso si ellos no me ayudaban. Y pues me interesó reuniones que vamos a estar aquí porque pues prácticamente mi hijo tiene algo, ¿verdad? Y nunca se lo han detectado en las escuelas, ahora que ya lo veo yo con más dificultad de aprendizaje, entonces es por eso que yo mandé eso. Pero yo mandé todo con fecha, firma y especificando qué es lo que quería, y pues espero que puedan hacer algo.
Muy bien. Señora, si hablo español y podemos hablar más después, voy a contestar en inglés ahora, ¿ok?
Ok, perfecto, también entiendo, nomás, más fácil para mí español. Gracias.
Good. So with that, so that question, as you guys heard, has to do with a 504 plan. So Audi, what it sounds like is you do not currently have an IEP. It sounds like you were not, perhaps they said that he wasn't found eligible for special education, which means the IEP. What they gave you instead is what's called a 504 plan. A 504 plan only gives you accommodations, which is like extra time for a test, to sit in the front of the class, to be able to maybe copy someone else's notes. It's just reasonable accommodations. A 504 plan will not give you services and supports. So if you find that 504 plan is not what he needs, it's not enough for him, then if they haven't yet done an evaluation, you can request an evaluation. Actually, let me ask you, did they already do an evaluation?
Fue lo que yo pedí en mi correo electrónico, que le hicieran una evaluación, y es lo que supuestamente ellos van a hacer durante 8 semanas, me dijeron. Y si en esas 8 semanas no veían un avance en él, entonces lo iban a requerir para los clases especiales o algo así, me dijeron. Porque él tiene pues problemas para enfocarse.
Okay. So what, again, we can probably talk a little bit more, but just in case it's benefiting others for this, one, you don't have to sign that 504 plan, because right now it sounds like what you've asked for is an evaluation. They must complete that evaluation within 60 days and have that meeting with you. If in that meeting they tell you he's not eligible for special education, then you can go to a due process for that disagreement. By giving you I don't know, I can't assure you exactly, but it sounds like by giving you a 504 plan, they're kind of hoping that you stick with that and that you don't come back for the results of the evaluation, or they may not even do the evaluation. So know that what your right is you already requested the meeting. They have to give you an assessment plan within 10 days. You then have, and we're going to review this in part 3, you then have 10 days to sign it and give them consent. And it sounds like you've already done all that. Now they have 60 days to do the evaluation and to have the IEP meeting. If that doesn't happen, you can do a state compliance complaint. If they do it and they say he's not eligible, then you can go to a due process. Okay, so you don't have to sign that 504. And again, I don't know, but I would say it sounds like the 504 is a little bit of a distraction strategy from them. Okay, because if you're requesting an IEP, that's very different than a 504 plan. A 504 plan is just going to give you reasonable accommodations. If you think he needs speech, occupational therapy, a one-on-one, RSP, whatever, that you cannot get that under a 504. Okay. All right. Very well. Any other questions? Okay. Good. So thank you. And again, my information, I think they're copy and pasting it again. So feel free to contact us. Okay. So we talked about recording your meeting. Record it can really be of benefit to you. Okay. Now know that the law says you must sign your IEP within a reasonable amount of time. There's times where I get phone calls, and if this is you, I'm smiling because I get it, where parents even tell me, like, I haven't signed an IEP in 10 years. And I'm like, oh, no, you probably should, right? So they're almost proud that they haven't signed an IEP. But according to the law, right, you must sign it within a reasonable amount of time. The danger with not signing it, one, you're not doing what the law says, and two, the school can kind of paint you as being uncollaborative, right? We really want to help this parent, but they're not even signing the IEP, or hands are tied kind of thing, okay? So the law says you don't have to sign it. You have to sign it within a reasonable amount of time, but know that you do not have to sign it on that same day, okay? So let's say you're having your IEP meeting. If you are ever told, oh, you have to sign today, if not, we can't give you anything, that is not accurate. You can sign, you can take it home. We suggest you never sign it on that day, right? Because so much was discussed, right? You're signing a paper. You want to make sure you know what you're signing. So it probably would be in your best interest to take it home, right? And review it and then sign it. Now, how do you sign your IEP? Okay. Actually, one point before that. Know that they will ask you to sign an attendance sheet. Some parents have sometimes told me that they get confused if they're signing attendance, that they were there, or if they're already signing the paper that says, I consent to everything that was talked about. So usually you could tell the difference on the page because it says attendance and other people are signing it, right? Everyone who was there. But if you are uneasy about anything that you're signing, know that you could sign the attendance, and in the bottom you can say, this signature is to demonstrate attendance. This is not consent, right? Or whatever, you can specify what it was. You could take it a step further if you want to and do a letter of understanding after, right? And say, on such and such date, we had a meeting, good to see you all, right? Whatever, however you want to express yourself. I signed an attendance sheet. This is to confirm that that was not consent for an IEP. It was only a signature to indicate attendance. If anything in this letter is incorrect, please notify me within a reasonable amount of time, period. Okay. There are times, I hear this sometimes more often with Spanish speakers, where they will be asked to sign a document, and maybe the parent says, well, I'm going to sign it in English, fine, because I'm trusting what they're saying, and then they're going to give me a Spanish copy. If you don't have to do that, but if you do that, then you can then write a letter of understanding and say, my understanding is that I signed for 20 minutes of speech, a one-on-one, right? Write what you think that you signed for, right? And if there's any difference or discrepancy later, then you guys can hash that out, okay? So the other thing is, so again, you must sign it, but how do you sign it? If you're in agreement with everything that they put on there, beautiful. You get to just simply sign it in agreement. If you are not in agreement with what was placed on that IEP, excuse me as I navigate my eye here. If you are not in agreement with what was discussed in that document, then you can put, this is signing in disagreement. Okay. And you can sign in agreement or in disagreement accordingly. What I mean by that is, let's say in the meeting, they say, he has 20 minutes of speech. We, the school, is saying we are now going to only give him 5 minutes of speech. That's one thing. But then the other thing in the IEP is, fine, we're going to give him a one-on-one. Okay? You may be in disagreement with the first thing because you don't want him to go from 20 minutes to 5. So maybe that section you're going to sign in disagreement. And then the next section, though, where they're saying yes on the one-on-one, that you could sign an agreement, because I'm assuming, right? For you, you might say, oh yeah, I want the one-on-one. So you would sign that. So you can sign in disagreement or in agreement the sections based on whatever that may be. Now, if you can also sign to give consent, and I know that this can get a little confusing, so I'm going to try to be as clear as I can. So in one scenario, you're signing an agreement or in disagreement, right? Based on what you agree and disagree with. In a different scenario, you might say, I'm going to give consent for him to get, let's say this is a new service, okay? They're saying we're going to give him 10 minutes of speech from now on. And you're like, I think he needs 30 minutes, but they're saying no. But you don't want to go to a due process right now. What you could do is, I'm giving consent for him to start getting the 10 minutes, but I'm noting that I'm in disagreement with the fact that 10 minutes is enough. I think he needs 30 or whatever it is. So what I'm saying here is, you can sign in consent so that they can get what they said he needs, but you can also state your disagreement with the fact that you don't think those are enough minutes for him. The reason why this could be important is, if next year you want to go to a due process, the judge could see, oh, look, the mom has given consent, but she's never been in agreement with this. It might just help you demonstrate to the judge, I've always thought that this wasn't right. Right? Versus if the judge just sees agreement, he's going to say, oh, okay, well, the mom is newly disagreeing. The dad is newly disagreeing with this. But that way there's kind of record of your disagreement, all while you don't want to sign it in disagreement, because if not, he's not going to even get the 10 minutes, right? You want him maybe to get the 10 minutes while you decide if you're going to go to a due process and get him the 30 minutes, right? Or try to get him the 30 minutes. Does that make sense? Right? So you could sign an agreement in disagreement, or give consent and state that you're in disagreement with the amount of minutes or the service that they're providing. Okay. Next, one thing that can be very, very helpful, and that we encourage every parent to do, and this is based on the fact that the law says that parents can submit a parent report, and the parent report must be considered, is what the law says. Now, let's think about that, right? It says it must be considered. Doesn't mean they have to agree, but it says it must be considered, right? It must be reviewed by your IEP team. So one suggestion is writing a parent report. For every IEP that you have, write a parent report. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. All it could be is write parent report and do headings, communication, and then bullet points on the problems or the issues that your son or daughter has with communication. Social skills, and then bullet points of what issues he has under that. Behavior, movement, executive functioning, coordination, academics, etc. You get my drift, right? So a parent report is simply you putting on paper what you observe your son or daughter's needs to be. Okay? Keep in mind, so, evaluators, there's evaluators who are doing reports on your son or daughter. right? Because they're experts and they're observing your son or daughter. Who better though than to write a report than you, right? You're the one who sees all the needs. You're the one that knows your son or daughter. And I guess let me just insert a little comment here. In IEP meetings, it's my understanding that a lot of the times the parent feels lesser than everyone else in that room, right? Everyone seems to have degrees, everyone's dressed up, everyone's using language that you are like, I don't know what that means. I mean, they're speaking English, or you might be saying, I mean, they're telling it to me in Spanish and I know what the word is, but I don't know what that means, right? So it's an intimidating thing. So because of that feeling, sometimes parents may feel that they don't have a lot to offer. So in this, I want to say you do. You're the expert of your son or daughter. So who more than anyone should have a report in there? You, right? So don't miss the opportunity of making a parent report that will be part of their IEP. Okay. And again, a parent report doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be headings, categories of needs, communication, social skills, behaviors, etc., and bullet points under it of what the needs are. Okay. If you have incidents that have occurred because of the needs that he has, wonderful, write that. Okay. So one, that parent report would be considered and it can be part of your IEP. Two, the reason why that's helpful is it's kind of an agenda for you, right? I always like to share, I didn't share earlier in the presentation, but I myself, I am not a mom, right? I am not a parent. And the reason I like to say that is I can tell you what I know as an advocate, but I can't tell you, oh, I understand. I can't imagine how hard it must be to sit in a meeting and talk about your son or daughter's needs, especially when you're told otherwise by people who don't even know him or her, right? So I would say, I think it would be helpful for me in that situation to kind of have reminders of what I was going to say, right? Because sometimes in that meeting, the conversation starts happening and you're kind of lost now. And you're like, okay, any questions? Because, we got to go to lunch. And you're like, no, I don't know, So one, this presentation, I hope, gives you the confidence to know you are a part of that IEP team. You may be made to feel that this is their meeting and that you're kind of just, invited out of courtesy. That is not the case. And that is not based on the law. The law says that you are an equal participant in that meeting. So if, let's say, they tell you, hey, you have an IEP tomorrow. If you can't make it tomorrow, then you're not going to get anything. Nope. Right? You can reply to that in writing and say, I was given less than 24-hour notice about a meeting. I'm indicating that I cannot attend. Here are some alternative dates. I am available on Tuesday from 10 to 3, available on Thursday, available next Monday, give them a few dates, right? You can be the driver of this process. I'm saying it explicitly because I know from calls that we get from families that this isn't always the case of how it feels, right? It feels like we're on their clock and like you just got to do it. So you have the right to ask questions during these meetings. You have the right to do a parent report. You have the right to speak about your son and his needs, etc. Okay? If an IEP took place, but I have not signed yet, I'm reviewing it. Is it too late to submit a parent report? Good question. Excuse me. You can submit a parent report. At this point, it sounds like you may be asking either for a continuation of the IEP before you sign it, because the goal of the parent report is that your thoughts and your request get in there for you to get the service that you need, right? So, and remember, those decisions about making changes in the IEP happen with the team. So if you can submit a parent report. What the function of the parent report usually is to guide further conversation. So if you would submit a parent report at this point, I would wonder if you're kind of saying, I don't think the conversation's over, right? I can't sign this because the conversation isn't even over. I have more to say about my son. I have more to present about my son. So I would just wonder if you should consider that in terms of it's beyond the parent report. Do the parent report, but you might also be saying, I think there's more to discuss before I could make a decision about signing this or not. Okay. So you may want to request either for another meeting or whatever that may look like for your case. Okay. All right. So parent reports, parent reports, parent reports. All right. And actually, you know, I believe at the end of your presentation, at the very end, I think this presentation is 75 slides. So on slides 73, 74, 75, I've given resources. One of those resources is Disability Rights California. And they have a lot of resources, including, if I'm not mistaken, kind of an example of a parent report. I'm going to go back there, and if I find it, I will put it in your guys' Google Drive so that you can see it under all the resources. Okay. All right. Very well. Moving on. Getting services happens, or getting services through the IEP is a deficit-driven process. And I'm going to try to say this in the next 5 minutes so we can have time for questions. Getting services through the IEP is a deficit-driven process. It's important to keep this in mind. And this is where I say, as a non-parent, I say I could imagine that IEPs can be a little hard. So maybe do some self-care, do some venting with a friend before the meeting, because in this meeting, really, although you as a mom and me as an advocate, and I just so you know, I've been a therapist in the past, and so I've worked with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I don't care what people say about a particular person, probably because of sensory challenges. They are very smart, very competent, and have much potential, like everyone else. Although you may know that, and although I know that, right? And sometimes the behaviors throw people off, right? I worked a lot in the past with individuals who had difficulty regulating their bodies. They may be aggressive, they were nonverbal. And I got to see so many things. I worked with students who used alternative methods of communication, so they would type. And so here they were, and I do this respectfully, they were maybe engaging in a behavior that looked odd to some people, all while they requested support to type, and they said, that person thinks I'm dumb. And what they don't know is that I know, right? And they wrote this whole thing, and I was always marveled. I'm like, yep, right? I had a student in school. I used to support some students within the school district. And I had a student, I walked into the classroom and I'm looking for the student. I'm like, oh, let's say his name was John. And I was like, oh, I'm here to see John. And John, to my surprise, was in the corner of the classroom on like cushion pads. There was like a little bed area in a corner with bean bags, blankets, pillows. And my boy was just with his hands up and his feet up, just chilling, right? Just relaxing. And I saw him, and he was nonverbal, well, limited verbal communication, and he would use typing as his method of communication. And I got there, and he was kind of surprised to see me there because we knew each other from a different agency, not in school. And so he kind of saw me, and I was like, you know, I knew these teens. I was like, dude, get up. I was like, what are you doing? Right. And so he got up, he looked a little nervous, and we went outside of the classroom, and he used to go like this to my arm to request support to type. And so I'm supporting him to type, and he typed, literally, he typed, don't tell them I'm smart. And I was like, oh gosh, right? He cracked me up. I knew he had a lot of potential, but apparently no one in his class did. They wouldn't give him worksheets. He would go and take a nap all day, right? So he literally typed, and he engaged in movements and vocalizations that let me know he was kind of not being silly, but like he was being silly and he knew what he was doing. So anyway, he and I had a long conversation after that. I'll tell you more maybe in part 2. But I know, their potential. However, in these meetings, we're there to talk about what they cannot do. Because we need to, their needs, their problems equal services. And unfortunately, sometimes and again, I'm not a parent, so I can only begin to imagine if as a parent, you're kind of maybe even a little going through a depression of like, man, what's happening with my son? And you go into a meeting and let's say the school starts telling you, Johnny is the best guy we have in the class. He's amazing. And you're like, oh, of course he is. He's my kid. Oh my gosh. And you start feeling excited about this. Then what we hear from some families is quickly the conversation turns into, he's so great that we're going to graduate him from services. Sign here because we're not going to give him anything anymore. And so quickly it's like, wait, what do you mean? Right? I was getting happy because you said my son was cool and I know he is. And now you're saying that means he doesn't qualify for services anymore. So we find it important to remind parents, yay, for the progress. Absolutely. Maybe they're making progress, maybe not, but we believe they're making progress. Don't lose sight though of the fact that obviously my son is in special education because his achievement is below that of his peers. So even if you tell me your son's making progress, awesome. That may just mean though that he went up this much. So the question is, how much of a gap is there still? My son still has needs. Let's clap for the progress he's making, but let's get back on track with our conversation of what does he still need to get to where he needs to be, right? So it's important to recognize getting services through the IEP is driven by deficits. Again, which is why your parent report can help you express and communicate to the team what exactly are all of those needs. Because if not, you yourself might lose track of that. As you're discussing his needs, and this might sound like a play on words, and it kind of is, be mindful of not using words like optimal or best. It would be the best for my son to have a one-on-one. That would be the best. That's a bad word in the IEP meetings. The reason for that is the law doesn't say that he's entitled to a free and best public education. The law says he is entitled to a free, appropriate public education. So we want to get used to using the language of the law, which is him having a one-on-one is appropriate for his needs. Because if I say having a one-on-one is the best, you just gave the school a reason to not give it to you. Because all they have to say, even if they don't say it out loud, it's not our job to give them the best. Right? It's kind of like when you enter a raffle contest and they're like, you're going to win a car. They never said it was going to be a car from 2023. Right? So you show up and you're like, oh, it doesn't have seats. Got it. But it's a car, right? Whatever that may mean. So with special education, it's the law says appropriate. It doesn't say they're going to get the Mercedes of education, right? Or whatever a Tesla. Sorry, I'm behind. Tesla, right? It doesn't say your son is entitled to the Tesla of education. He's just entitled to what's appropriate. So it will suit you best to get used to that language and not use the word best. Also, it will suit you to review the evaluation reports. We'll talk about evaluations later, but when you're reading documents, you want to make sure you say, let's change that word best to appropriate. You can do that because oftentimes the evaluation reports are drafts. So when you review that at home and say, oh, it says best, it's appropriate. It's not the best, it's appropriate. Okay, so getting the word best or optimal out of your language and changing it for adequate or appropriate according to his needs. Okay, and I'll leave us with this. The reason why the parent report, knowing what his needs are, is so important is because in the IEP, it works the following way. Many times, right, parents go into the IEP and they're ready to request the services. I want a one-on-one, I want, right? It's kind of like you're going in and ordering like your combo, right? So I want this, I want that. And the problem is we haven't had enough conversation. The parent hasn't contributed enough to the conversation about the needs of the person. So your first job as the advocate of your son or daughter is to establish the need. Then, and we'll talk about this more next Thursday, then the team must create goals for the IEP. Then we request services based on the goals that were created based on the needs. It's a pyramid, right? So instead sometimes of focusing so much on the service, we really got to do a better job at laying the foundation for what my son needs. And then making sure that the goals are appropriate, that they're not too low, that then he's going to reach them in 2 months and then waste his time for the rest of the school year, and that they're not so high that then they say, oh, look, he's not even making progress. Why are we even giving him speech? Right? So finding that sweet spot of a goal. Once you have a goal, if they're saying we're denying you service, the question is simple. And all you have to do is, I'm sorry, I'm really confused. And you really could play the confused card, right? Don't play the lawyer card. The law says, right, play the confused card. I'm confused. The IEP has goals, but you're telling me that he's going to get 0 services. How is he going to meet those goals? I'm so confused, right? Because what should happen is once there's needs established, once there's goals that are written, the services should flow naturally. Okay, so the more prepared you are for discussing these needs, the more effective of an advocate you can be during that IEP meeting. Okay, next Thursday, we'll be starting off from here. We'll look at the structure of an IEP and then go from there. We'll discuss evaluations. We'll discuss what performance levels are. We'll discuss goals, accommodations, services, and placement. Okay, and then our third session, the last session, we will go more in depth into understanding how to understand evaluations. Okay, because sometimes they just look like numbers. Okay, all right, with that, I will pause our presentation here. And I'm sorry, in the 6 minutes that we have, I was hoping to finish earlier, but in the minutes that we have, we'll take some questions. And let me pedir tres. Okay, very good. Just a comment. Good. The IEP took place. Oh, never mind. I answered that question. Okay. That being said, Cindy or anyone, any other questions in the chat that I may have missed?
No, you've answered all the questions. Thank you, Sophia, so much for the presentation. I want to thank everyone for coming to this presentation today. I hope that you are all able to come next Thursday from 6 to 8 again to continue with the second part of the presentation. Now, Antonio will put a poll for everyone to please answer. As Antonio does that, I want to remind everyone that we will have this same training in Spanish in March 2nd, 9th, and 16th. I also want to remind parents from the Long Beach Unified School District about the committee advisory committee meeting. It's next Wednesday, February 8th at the Teacher Resource Center, and it's from 6 to 8. So if you want to join us there, I'm at the meeting. So if you have questions, you can approach me then. And then we'll see Sophia on Thursday. Antonio, did you put the poll?
Yeah, it's already live, so please feel free to answer them so we can have as much feedback as possible. I'll give it a couple seconds.
And if I may, if any of you would like to be added to our newsletter, for our office. We send them every so often. I will put a link and you can go on there and fill it out so that you could subscribe to our newsletters. The few questions are in English. So if you're a Spanish speaker and you would like to just send me your information, I will submit the form for you. So it's a constant contact sign up list. So I will put it here. And just, if I may, if you'd like to sign up, you would just put your email. I'll put the link on the chat and you could put your email. You could identify if you're a family member of someone with a disability, a person with a disability, or a professional in the field, and then what your preferred language is, and then sign up, and that would be it. Okay, and again, if you speak Spanish and aren't too sure about what the questions say, please feel free to contact me and I'll do that. And there's the link.
All right, I'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll close it up. It seems like 13 folks have signed up or at least responded to the polls. All right, sweet. I close poll. Just wanted to bring it back to Cindy and Sophia if this is something we got to report or is it fine to move forward?
Fine to move forward. If you guys would just do me the favor of saving the report so that I can receive that and report that later.